There are conversations that every school leader needs to have. The conversation with the teacher who isn't meeting expectations. The conversation with the employee whose attitude is hurting your culture. The conversation with the person who is talented but inconsistent. And then you have the conversation that you need to have with the person who is not doing what's in the best interest of your students. And here's the truth: leadership isn't just about making good decisions, leadership is about having the courage to communicate difficult conversations with employees and move on from that. Welcome to Beyond the Bell, where today we're going to talk about the conversations that leaders avoid. I am Tiffany Dixon, the assistant principal.
And I'm Tim Hardigree, the principal. This is one of the hardest aspects of any skill set associated with any administrators, having those tough conversations with parents who may see things a little bit different than you do. You're looking at it from a professional point of view, and the parents looking at it from their child's point of view. And where that middle ground is where you have to try to approach to try to meet that parent halfway to assure, or in this case, try to meet an employee or a staff member, a faculty member, or whoever that may be, to try to establish the fact that we're all on the same page if you have the student's mindset in your forefront.
And the conversations can be difficult for many reasons as a leader. You definitely don't want the conversation to be misunderstood.
That's right.
You don't want to affect a professional relationship, and you don't want your message to come across the wrong way.
That's right. You don't want to embarrass somebody. You don't want to humiliate them. You don't want to interfere with their professional obligations. But, some of the reasons why you try to avoid these difficult conversations, because we're all human. We all have a caring heart. We're in education. We care about people. We care about students. And you want people to technically, at the end of the day, be satisfied with their job, be satisfied with the aspect that we're doing right by children. We absolutely, by nature, don't like conflict. We technically don't like for people to be upset with us to a degree, and we absolutely don't want to damage a relationship. And the reason why I say that, we're out of school where I went to school here, so I know most of the people here. We all grew up together, and at the end of the day, it's still business, and it's still about relationships, and it's still about the professional side of me and employee, but it could also been that we were friends at one point in time. So therein lies a tricky situation or tricky topics that we have to touch. And we absolutely don't want to be misunderstood when it comes to someone's professional approach to making their classroom, making their topic, and making their pacing situation better for their students.
Well, and two, you never want to damage teacher morale.
That's right.
You want them to intrinsically build morale, but you still have to have those tough conversations sometimes. In your experience as a principal, because you're going into year 5 as the principal of this high school, what do you think, as far as the conversations that we've talked about that are hard, which one would you say was the hardest for you?
Oh, I think anytime you approach any conversation, they definitely don't get smaller if you avoid them, and they definitely don't go away if you avoid them. So I'm not saying that you have to make a decision on the spot, but absolutely, addressing someone on classes in which they like to teach just because they've been around for a certain number of years. And many teachers do that. I have seniority because I've been around here 25 years, and I expect to do honors algebra 2. That's not always the case. You and I have come into that situation just a few times in which we've had to address someone and maybe change their schedule and then deal with the backlash afterwards and try to present the fact that this is where I think you need to be, honestly.
Yeah, and a lot of times you have to be able to know what exactly is the problem.
Right.
And then can I articulate the problem?
That's right.
To discuss it with the teacher. Do I have all the facts?
That's right.
I mean, these are important things that you need to know. And then also, on that same note, are there some conversations that you feel like tough conversations that would be better coming from an assistant principal than from the principal?
I think so. Anytime you have conversations with students, or you have conversations with students and their parents based off discipline, that's always a good conversation to have from the assistant principal. Now, when it comes to the academics of the school or the personnel related situations of the school, that always needs to come from the principal, because he's ultimately in charge of placing that person, or he's in charge of assuring that the safety and security of the building is always at play. Just the day-to-day operations associated with rules and procedures. Everybody has their mindset. Everybody's an expert in education because everybody went to school. But the way that you govern your school is a gut reaction. I went to school here, but I was a teacher here and a coach here and a AP here and now a principal here. So I've got a pretty good understanding of how our school operates and how our community is going to respond to certain situations. But to have a conversation with someone who you know is a good person, but they still need help, that's a tough conversation. Someone in a class who's been loyal, who's been a good person, been a good employee, but they're not getting the best out of their kids. Maybe maybe they're getting close to retirement. Maybe they should have retired 5 years ago. But right now, they're still in a position in which they're having to work, but they're not producing under the assessment guidelines that we have to be addressed by the state. That's a tough conversation to have with someone that you technically like, or that you've worked with for a long time, or that you trust, or maybe that you respect. Let's put it that way. That's a very tough conversation to have.
One conversation that I know I've had with several teachers is I would put them, if they're struggling in the classroom, like when you do instructional snapshots or observations.
Absolutely.
If there's a teacher who is struggling in the classroom and you work with them, coach them, go through cycles, build them up, and you meet with them over, and a lot of times, there's procedural issues that are hindering them being successful in the classroom.
Right.
We have what are called professional intervention plans that we can put classified or certified teachers on.
That's right.
And the great thing about those is that, and I recommend these too, this is coming from someone who has used them, because it keeps you, it's a form that you fill out with what you have, seen in the classroom. Mm-hmm. What you have discussed by meeting with the teacher in the classroom, and then when you follow up after the observation. So you've got all this information in one place, so it's documented, it's easy to read. Y'all discuss a timeline about how long you were going to have to establish or fix the problem, I guess you would say, and then you revisit it. So it's great documentation, and not that you're not that you are necessarily documenting to get rid of someone, but it is a great tool to help someone grow.
That's right. And something great about that is that when you walk in there, you're carrying facts with you.
Yes.
You're carrying a structure with you.
Yes.
So in our school, we go in and we look for learning intentions, and we look for success criteria. We look for the I do's and we do's and you do's, and we look for the ACT bell ringers, the lesson plans, the pacing guides, the emergency plans. Those things are factual that we can see when we walk in a class. So if those are things that have to be addressed, they're being addressed by everybody in the entire school building. And we always say, especially from a assistant principal's point of view, when you have to meet with a parent about a discipline matter, you want to bring your facts. Mm-hmm. Anytime you have to bring opinions, that's where your conversation is going to go south immediately. Yes. And especially from my point of view, when I meet with a teacher, I have to bring the facts. I don't bring my opinions at all. That's why when you go into a classroom and you observe a teacher, you're observing the teacher off a structured assessment form that everybody is judged off of. So if they ever want to come back and critique that, you're going directly off of your form, what you saw, and the time and the date in which you saw what you observed within that classroom.
And I actually, on my PIPs, as I like to call them, I actually include quotes from their observations.
That's
things that
good.
I have, that I've seen. I don't just go in there and say, well, you did this on this day. I mean, I can actually put it on the form to where it can be seen.
Right.
And that helps when you meet with someone, because you're not just throwing anything out there.
That's right.
You're actually putting facts down about what you observed while you were in the classroom. And like I said, a lot of times these tough conversations happen not because the teacher's ineffective as an educator. They're ineffective because of, roadblocks that they created for themselves.
That's right.
By not being operationally prepared for class.
That's right. Such as, you talk about a missed expectation becoming a pattern. It becomes a habit. Somebody missing their expectation. They have a hard time getting to work, or the failure of setting their classroom up in time. We call it the business of education. As we walk into the class and we like to see a certain things, we call it the fives. We like to see there's certain fives. You want to expand on that?
So we use two different cycles of instruction, I guess you would call it. So we have everyone in our building has a cycle of instruction that they follow. And so it begins with an ACT bell ringer, their learning intentions, their I do, we do, you do, and then their success criteria. And then the only thing that changes when we go into science, instead of being I do, we do, you do, it's the 5 E's. That's that right. They could be working on, not necessarily working on all of them in the same day, because that's not going to happen. But that's the difference in what we look for when we go in instructional classrooms. And so, it's, that's the expectation of what we see, but that's not all we're looking at. Right. We're not just coming in, that's non-negotiables. That's going to be there. It's not an option, but is it effective?
Right.
Is it accurate? Is your learning intention actually set up correctly? Does what you listed as success criteria, are the students going to be able to do that at the end of the lesson, or do they go together? See, that's right. Very important. Did you do an ACT bell ringer? Did you just put something up there to do, or is it some way that you're going to check to make sure that it helps the students prepare for the ACT? So that's what we look for when we go in classrooms. But a lot of times when we go in classrooms do these instructional observations, we're sitting there watching teachers for a long period of time to where they haven't front loaded and gotten ready for their class. So then when you come in to see something, they start struggling, and then they're still trying to take roll and they're trying to do this. See, all that goes together with management. You should be able to take attendance while you are doing other things. And you shouldn't shut down classroom instruction just to take attendance.
Right.
Are you prepared for your lesson? Like I said, I can look at a board all day long, but I've got to see what you're actually doing in the classroom to see if what you have on the board is accurate.
And don't get it wrong. When you go in and hold someone accountable, it's almost as if no one really wants to fail. Nobody, I truly think no one truly wants to fail and look bad. But when you go in and you don't see exactly what you want to see, and you have to hold someone accountable, it's almost to the point in which they feel like you don't care about them, or that you're picking on them, or that you're targeting them. Okay. And, that could be a level of generational change. I like to talk about the Gen Xers versus the Gen Zers. Gen Zers might be a little more emotional when it comes to criticism, whereas maybe a Gen Xer may not be. But the direct opposite of that is the accountability structure doesn't mean that we don't care. It just means that we're attempting to grow you in a pattern which is consistent with maybe some of the failures that you've had in that class. So we don't want them to get that wrong. Don't misconstrue the fact that we're holding you accountable because you are the professional within that class, not because we don't care, not because we don't appreciate you as a teacher, but it's because we want to see you grow.
Well, and also in any hard conversation that you have with an employee, regardless if it's instructional, or classified position, you want to make sure that you establish what the next steps are going to be.
That's right.
You don't want to say, okay, well, we've met now, and then here's, the conversation we had. We'll see what happens next.
Right.
You want to make sure that you end it with clarity.
That's right.
You want to say, okay, here's what we are going to do moving forward. And you want to make sure that you list these things so that you have a solid plan about what's to come next, and not just go, well, we'll see how it goes, and not really give them a plan to be successful.
That's right. You never want to leave a conversation open-ended. You always want to leave it with, like you said, clarity, but you also want to leave it with, what the expectations were. Where do you currently stand? What needs to change? And, as you're looking at that, and what support is available. But even beyond that, you always want to follow that up with an email, just to make sure, and some form of documentation to say that, okay, this is where we were today. We didn't have a great conversation, or we had a great conversation. This is where our target points were. This is what we had to follow up on. These were the areas of concern. These were your complaints. This is the solution in which we provided. So you want to follow up on that so there's no misconstrue notions that say that this is what you said versus what I said. You never want to do that. Tough conversations are what they are. But if within your own being, if you want someone to grow, you're going to have that tough conversation. If you don't care about them, then you're not going to have that tough conversation. That's just it in a nutshell. And we do so many observations around here, and you're so good about going into classrooms and seeing the good, bad, and the ugly, and then following that up with a great conversation at the end, whether that's good, bad, or ugly, and then following that up with an email.
Right. And I also like the fact that it's not just me, it's a team of us.
Absolutely.
So I might go in this month or this quarter, and then someone else will go in the next quarter. And that way we can compare, did what I saw first quarter or during this observation improve after the conversations and the plan that we created to the time that the next administrator goes in. And the reason why these conversations are so important for leaders to have with employees is because if you ignore something, it's not going to go away. It's when your culture starts to erode, when you allow things like that to happen because you're not addressing issues. And it is definitely okay for a leader to be compassionate and firm at the same time. You have to have that balance, because if you're overly compassionate and not firm, that's going to, ruin your culture.
That's true.
But then if you're just like too hard and not compassionate with your staff or your faculty staff, that'll run them off. So you don't want to damage morale, but you don't want to sacrifice corrections that need to be made that will hurt your students, which is what we're here for.
And that's very easy. I mean, we've kind of done this with some employees, possibly, in which you've had that tough conversation. You've documented everything in your email. You're building that so-called portfolio because they're just not growing and living up to the expectations as quick as you like for them to. You can, as simple as changing a duty spot, could change their mentality throughout the day, because now they know they're on point. If an employee is not coming in on time, give them a duty, give them an assignment, give them something in which they're going to have to be there on time. Because if you don't expect people to perform the way that you perform.
Right. And you're not necessarily trying to set that person up for failure.
Right.
You're trying to, make them more aware, of maybe something they're struggling in, like getting to work on time.
That's right.
And so, when you give someone a duty like that, a lot of times it does fix the problem.
It does. It kind of eliminates part of that hard conversation that you are going to have. So when you set up the classroom and you walk into that classroom, and these are the 7 things that have to be visible when you walk in. It doesn't take anything but effort to set those things up in that classroom. That gives you the ability to quick check somebody, to spot check somebody in there. So that eliminates your hard conversation that you could have.
And this is a podcast for future leaders or current leaders.
Right.
And so, let's be honest. There are some times when you put someone on a professional, improvement plan that they don't improve. And it does help service documentation.
It does.
In order to maybe help that person find a school that is a better fit for them. And so you're not always going to be successful just because you did an intervention plan with someone.
Right.
So you got to remember that. So you like you said, you have to document. That's important, because you've got to do what's in the best interest of your students and your school, because that's who we're here to serve.
That's right.
And like I said, that's why it's important that you have these tough conversations with your faculty and staff, because I want everyone to be happy, but I don't want to sacrifice student achievement and growth just to keep a teacher comfortable.
That's right.
And that's important to remember.
We've had some of those tough conversations, especially toward the end of the year when you have a non-tenured employee who you've invested, and they're just not turning the corner for you. So as I pull them in, it would be something as simple as, look, we've given you 2 years to live up to the expectations and standards that we expect here, but I think it's time for you to experience your professional growth in another environment. I think that's the correct way to kind of approach somebody, to say, that, okay, maybe you need to see education from another point of view because you're establishing an identity within the school in which you teach right now that might live with you a little bit longer than you want it to. So there's plenty of different schools to go to, and then plenty of different environments in which you can teach in. And there's nothing wrong with someone making a change professionally and a career oriented to put yourself back on the right track or the right playing field. And we've seen that within our own careers.
Yes.
There might be a time in which you think that, okay, maybe I've run my course at this particular school. I need to see my professional obligation from another environment.
Right.
And that's not always a bad thing. So as you lead into, having these conversations with people, there's a couple of things that look, here's 3 things that you can take to the bank. Okay. One, like I said, you start with the facts. Don't come in there with opinions. Don't come in there with stories. Don't try to be funny. Nobody's expecting that because you're having the conversation because it's business. Okay. 2, explain the impact that they're having on those kids. If their actions are having a negative impact on kids, that's a major problem right there. If they're having a negative impact on your culture, that's another problem. I've always thought that there are 2 aspects to every school. There's your academics, and then there's also your extracurricular, and they tie into each other, and each of the students' impact and experience on your campus. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. And then number 3, what are your expectations? You better be clear on your expectations right at the end. So starting with your facts, explaining the impact their behavior is having, and then clarifying your expectations. Those are 3 things that can simplify a hard conversation.
So, like I said, being that you're year 5 principal, do you think that some of your tougher conversations that you have had have been with your classified or your certified staff?
I honestly think my certified, and I'll go back to year 1 and year 2 as some of the tougher conversations that I have actually had to have because you're not fully in the game yet. You're not fully complete with every component of the life of a principal. And then people are hitting you from all different angles. And furthermore, I think they're trying to test you to see where you want to go and what decisions you're going to make. Those were some of the tougher years of making hard conversations, probably worse than what they really needed to be. But, luckily, now in year 5, I'm making decisions quicker and more immediate with a lot of clarity and experience. So those are making our tough conversations a little bit easier.
So with everything, I mean, in most people's professional, careers, you get better with experience.
That's right.
We've had that conversation before. You can have a great administrator who starts off that way, but they still can grow to be excellent.
Absolutely.
So, I think everybody experiences growth throughout their career. And during that growth, you have some setbacks because
That's
sometimes
true.
you get, brought down to earth. You think you're on top of the
absolutely.
world. And then, your principal, your boss comes to you and says, hey, I think you and I are talking, this is where you messed up. This is what you should have done. This is how you could have made it better. And I think that that's important for everyone to show growth, to have these hard conversations.
Absolutely.
And like you said, I think sometimes we hyper focus on things that maybe not be as important as we think they are. And you've got a saying, you say wars and battles, Dixon.
Wars and battles.
Wars and battles. And that's true. I think about that a lot of times. But I think as long as you're establishing your expectations, when you meet with someone, they know the expectation. You've done your due diligence in observing it, not necessarily in a classroom, but you could be observing office staff too. And then you bring the facts.
That's right.
You set a plan and you end it with clarity. Okay, from now on, moving forward, this is what we're going to do.
There you go.
And that way you really have something to look at to see if your plan is working. If you just sit there and say, well, this is what happened, maybe you should try this. Okay, well, we'll just see what happens if you do it this way. You're really not going to get much out of
Not
that.
much. I mean, both of us are administrators and we see the entire picture, and you're not going to jump somebody on one mistake because everybody's going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. But if your mistake becomes a habit, that's when that tough conversation needs to be held. Whatever your mistake may be, from getting here on time to speaking to parents inappropriately to speaking to kids inappropriately, being where you're not supposed to be too many times. All those things can become a habit and eventually affect the culture in which you're trying to establish.
And this is actually a great conversation for classroom teachers as well,
Sure.
because they avoid hard conversations with parents.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of times they'll send you a write-up and say this student did X, Y, and Z. And on our referral, it says, well, what steps have you taken
Yeah.
to, address the discipline?
Right.
And they'll say, call the parent. Well,
Mhm.
they call the parent and say, well, Miss Jones said that she called and talked to you. And she'll say, well, I haven't talked to Miss Jones.
Right.
A lot of times they avoid those conversations, the difficult conversations
do.
with parents.
But it's kind of odd. I mean, we've been doing it a long time, but I've seen this many, many times from the administrator point of view, is that a great teacher could get in front of a class all day long and they could teach kids and they can discipline kids, they can control kids, they can manage kids. But when it comes to the adults, they freeze up.
Yeah.
They really
get
freeze up.
intimidated.
They do. And they have a hard time holding that conversation on Johnny, who now has a 45 and has skipped her class twice.
Well, with all this being said, I mean, these are really things to think about from a classroom teacher, looking at it as a classroom teacher, looking at it as anyone, a dean of students, I guess
Sure.
you could say, someone in administration, having difficult conversations also with parents or with faculty and staff. I think, we should end this week with a challenge.
Okay.
If you are a classroom teacher who's been avoiding a difficult conversation, if you're a leader who has been avoiding a difficult conversation, I challenge you this week to make a plan and execute that difficult conversation, because that's going to help you grow as a leader or a classroom teacher.
That's right. Think about three things. Make it easier on yourself. Bring the facts. How does that impact children? And let's have an expectation. If you think about those three things as you go into a difficult conversation, regardless of whether it's with a child, whether it's with an adult, whether it's with an employee, or whether it's with a colleague, think about those three things, and that will simplify that tough conversation in which you have. Now, to go beyond that, do this. Maybe in the comments below, put in a conversation that you've had that you thought was difficult, that you had a tough time, that it was a conversation that you really didn't want to have, but maybe in the middle of that conversation that you felt a little bit like you froze up. Maybe you didn't end the conversation the way that you wanted to. Maybe you left it open. Put that down in the comments. Let's talk about it.
And two, if you have a plan that you use when you meet with teachers or staff or parents, I would like to see what you use too.
Absolutely.
Because I'm always willing to grow and adjust what I do, because I know what I do is not perfect or the greatest thing ever. It's just what I use and it works. But I would always enjoy seeing someone else's perspective,
Without a doubt,
as to what they use in their schools.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or maybe maybe your technique on approaching a really nasty parent coming in, or the way that you're going to approach a really nasty faculty member who is always negative. And maybe you're the principal, you're the AP that came in after a long-standing principal at AP, and now you can't do anything right. That conversation will never go right. So how do you approach it? Do you just avoid it? Do you give that good morning every morning, or that hello, or do you approach it head on? Those are some things that are real situations within any educational building that you may go into.
Yes. I mean, I think these are all good points that we've discussed today, and I really am anxious. Please like and subscribe.
That's right.
Our podcast, and give us some feedback as to what you would like to see us talk about moving forward.
Right. One thing I would love to get into, any aspiring administrator that is looking forward to getting into the world of secondary administration, any middle school, any elementary administration, I'd really like to have a podcast to develop the process. How did we get into it?
Right.
What were the steps that we took, and how did we break in? Because if either one of us left right now, there'd be 500 waiting on our job.
Oh, yes.
So with that being said, I'd like to talk about that in the next episode or in the coming episode. So if there's anything that you want to talk about, leave it in the comments below. But please please subscribe. This was season 1, episode 4, having those challenging conversations. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.